I have a very short time to just outline for you a massive body of work that I've been involved in for some 20 years now, and which is gradually coming out in book form, but is already available for your study in a large number of lecture series, which my friend Mark here has developed in the tape department of the Institute. So I'm going to do a lot of confusing of the issue tonight, and let me just say that to you in advance. There's no way that we can't do anything but confuse and muddy up the water a good bit here tonight, because the topic is very large. But the good news is that there are a lot of other series of lectures that are available to you through the Institute and the tape department. I'll refer to some of those before leaving tonight. But let me just say that this is going to be an outline to try to give you a sense of our topic for tonight. And let me just refer us to that. What our job tonight is talking about forming the male self. And I see our task tonight as addressing, by way of a Jungian approach, my Jungian approach, which I want to say at the outset is my Jungian approach. It is not Jung's approach. It is based on Jung's thought, and I'll be showing you how it's based on Jung's thought. I think it goes beyond Jung's own thought on masculinity, and I may say some things later about that issue. But it is one Jungian approach to the problem of forming the male self. We've got to talk about why the male self. That is to say, why don't we just talk about forming the self? Is there any kind of difference between the male self and the female self? There are a lot of people today that don't think that it's useful to talk about gender difference. And in fact, that think it's a negative thing to talk about gender differences. But the assumption of this course is that you need to talk about psychological development in men and psychological development in women, and that they may not be shaped exactly the same way. So we've got to talk about what one might say about differences in the male self and in the female self, and the issue of forming the self. That implies that this developmental issue is central. And I want to say at the outset that not only is it a central issue, it's a critical issue of our time, and it's one that's not being addressed very creatively in our time. So let me begin by laying out a number of assumptions that I work from. And I'll just lay these out, and I'm going to try to get everything I have to say in terms of my wrap out on the table before the break. And then we'll spend our discussion time after the break kicking it around. And so let me just lay out assumptions. Number one, I am a Jungian. Theoretically, it matters what school of thought you're in. I am not a post-Jungian in the way that is used a lot today. That is, there are a lot of people that call themselves post-Jungians that don't believe in a structured, deep archetypal self. I'm not one of those. I agree with Jung. The unconscious is structured. It's not, like the Freudians thought, a boiling cauldron of energy which is shapeless and is much like a boiling tea kettle. So When I say I'm a Jungian, I have certain assumptions that really matter in terms of one's approach to all kinds of things. In other words, theories really matter in terms of the way you approach things. Here is the fundamental issue. From a Jungian point of view, there is a collective unconscious. This exists in you before any personal experiences. In other words, there is in your unconscious, according to Jung, he agreed with Freud and Adler about this, there are many things in your unconscious that are personal issues that come from your own traumas, your own dysfunctional family experience, we all had it. But from a Jungian point of view, tremendous implications lie in the fact that we have a collective unconscious, that there is an inner blueprint for the self that lies in our biological inheritance. It has tremendous implications for spiritual issues and religious issues, ethical issues, public issues, but it is grounded in one's biology. And so that's a very big thing to get in mind, that if you buy a Jungian point of view, you believe that the unconscious is structured. He talked about the objective psyche. There is a psyche that is objective and that you meet when you're born into it. I mean, you're not only just meeting your social environment, like a lot of people today in intellectual circles think, their sociological determinism and so forth. You are born into a body. Jung's psychology is an incarnational psychology. You are born into a human body, and this carries with it roots in a collective unconscious that have implications for everything in psychology. Now, I assume also that for thousands of years of human culture, tribal peoples around the world discovered the necessity for treating males and females differently in terms of initiatory experiences. There are people who say that was simply sociologically determined, and the fact that there were more preoccupation with male initiation rituals than with female initiation rituals simply was a mark of some sociological patriarchal bias. One can argue that case. Certainly, as we shall see tonight, certain masculine traits have led the males of our species to get into domination. We're going to be talking about the roots of that. And therefore, there are always political implications of one's biology, that some of which are very ugly and have to be compensated for by culture and by ethics and by moral and spiritual development. But what I want to point out is, from my point of view, there are other reasons grounded in the uniqueness of the male psyche that I believe led those tribal peoples to put such energy into male initiation. And we're going to be looking at what I believe to be the reason for that. The human, and what I believe to be the human wisdom behind that in practically every tribal culture you can study around the world. Not everyone, practically everyone. Next, when modernization came on the scene, the modern culture, a tremendous sea change occurred in human culture with regard to masculinity and femininity, for that matter. Modernization got rolling, really rolling, in the 15th century, 16th century, and became accelerated with the Enlightenment of the 18th century in Western culture. That modernization process, still going on in the world today, led to an incredible decline in ritual process of all kinds. It led to a decline in the utilization of ritual in human culture. Wherever you find modern culture, you find ritual processes of all kinds depreciated and pathologized. That's an assumption I have. I think I could prove it if I had the time to you. Next assumption. When you do away with ritual processes, you lose all of the cultural wisdom about how to help males become adequate males and how to help females become adequate females. You lose the ritual, you lose the process of helping people into maturation. So, my assumption, modern culture understands far less about how to form a male self than peoples around the world did thousands of years ago. We can argue about that. But that's one of my assumptions. And I will point as we go to the fact that we have to decide whether the Holocaust of male abuse of aggression and power in so many places in the world is the best our species can do as males. That is, are some radical feminists right to demonize the male of a species, that they are essentially destructive? In essence, this is their essence? Or is, as I believe, what we're seeing so widely, a result of the loss of ancient wisdom about how to help males steward their power for the human community? Now, I'm no romantic about tribal cultures. I've studied too many of them. But I am something of a historian. And I want to point you to the fact that the destructiveness of human beings in general and of male human beings in particular has taken a curve up like this since the Civil War of the United States, with the increase of efficient high-tech military technology. And we have seen killing on a scale, destructiveness on a scale since 1865, since 1861, that boggles and completely eclipses anything that ever came before in any tribal culture. So there is another one of my assumptions. That is to say, we're doing much more poorly in terms of forming male selves today. And so now let me turn to my assumptions that have been based on my own research for many years that I don't have really time to get into all the wheres and why-fors and all that. But I'm just going to lay it out for you, what I think about this, and then we can argue. Next assumption. I agree with Jung about something that is laid out extensively in his collected works. And that is that if you study the symbolism of the human self, you will find that almost in every culture it is presented as quadrated, fourfold, four sides to the self. And I don't have the collected works here to show you tonight, but I want to invite you to get the 20th volume, the index, and look under Quaternio. Look under the entry Quaternio, and look at the enormous list of references. And then I want to encourage you to look at the pictures in Jung's works and in the book Word and Image that has been published about Jung. And look at the four-sided mandala images, which are all throughout his work. One of the things Jung was very interested in was this tendency of the psyche to experience itself in fourfold form. Now, Jung and Jungians later came to emphasize what they believed the fourfoldness to be. The fourfoldness was what? The four functions, right? Intuition, thinking, feeling, and sensation. And so most of the work you've seen done on this fourfoldness by Jungians has been in typology. Less well known is Jung's interest in the double quaternio. That is the eightfoldness of the psyche. Jung asserted in his book Ion in the Collected Works, which I want to refer you to, under a chapter called On the Phenomenology of the Self, the Structure of the Self, he presented a series of diagrams of the shape of the self geometrically as an octahedron. He seemed to intuit that you could argue that the self had an octahedral shape, that is, 8 sides, 2 pyramids base to base, the shape of the calcium fluorite crystal. That was never developed a great deal in Jung's own thought, except for in that section. You see it developed later by John Layard in a book called The Celtic Quest, where he talks about the structure of the self as the diamond body. You also see it addressed by my friend James Hall in a recent book published by Murray Stein, edited book called I think it's something Liminality and Analysis. I don't know, I can't remember the exact title of the book. It's about transition states in the analytic process. And James Hall had an article in there about this diamond body shape of the self. Tonight I'm going to tell you what I think the diamond body shape is, how I think it's coded, based on my own work. So let me just go into what I believe about this. I believe, based on my research, that there are indeed 4 sectors in the human self. I think Jung was right about that. Based on my work, though, I think that typology is not adequate to talk about it. That the 4 powers in the human self are, I believe, essentially the same energies for male and female. There are, let's think of them, I like to think with sociobiologists. I also appreciate the work of Anthony Stevens, whose book, Archetypes, A Natural History of the Self, is a book I admire. I like to think of these programs. Archetypes have great spiritual significance. I don't want to deny that whatsoever, but for me, they are first and foremost biograms. That is, these are programs for biological development that are inherited in your gene structure. So there are 4 programs in my view, and I'm going to point them out in the male and the female self and say what I think they are. We will get into gender difference shortly thereafter. There's a program for nurturance, inclusive nurture, blessing, mentoring, creative ordering, source of resourcing, king and queen, biograms or archetypes. There is a biogram, I believe, for assertiveness, effective aggression. In other words, I believe, along with the earlier Freud, that there is an aggressive instinct that has its own line of development. And maturation in this line has to do from moving from rage to effective action, and which has as its highest forms of expression the capacity to organize, to plan, to be effective, to serve, and to protect. That motto on the cars of Chicago's finest should not be seen as a joke, in my view. That is a statement about a biogram that is in the potential of every man and woman. The sad state of affairs on our planet, in my view, is a mark of how poorly we do in helping people mature on that line of development. There's a line of development in terms of cognitive functioning, understanding. We talk about, in philosophy, we talk about hermeneutics, theory of interpretation, how to interpret the sector of awareness. This we call the biogram or archetype of the magician. In its lowest form of development, you might say it's using knowledge to mystify, obfuscate, confuse, manipulate, often in antisocial ways. It's there, we believe, to help you see through things. And the greatest writer on this topic, of course, is James Hillman, who makes the capacity to see through fundamentalisms and other simplistic thinking one of the highest expressions of the human self. We believe he's talking about the development of this magician. In highest expression, when it gets really integrated, notice these lines moving toward the center of these quadrated figures refers to the line of development or individuation and maturation. As the magician gets more integrated and more mature, becomes a healer. And is the virtue that is manifest there is wisdom. Low levels, human beings use their knowledge in antisocial ways. It's what we would call shadow magician or immature boy magician, girl magician. At higher levels of development, knowledge is used to empower and liberate, transform, and heal. Third biogram is the biogram of the lover. It is that capacity to become dependent in a healthy way. Which is not something you hear much about today, but because dependency has gotten a bad rep, bad press. A lot of people think it is always immature. In my view, the best in psychoanalytic theory today shows that you can never overcome your narcissism, your pathological narcissism, until you get to where you can be dependent in a healthy way upon other people. And that is to acknowledge how much you love them and how much you need them. What is known as codependency today is an immature expression of this because it is not balanced by other poles of the psyche, other powers in the psyche. But this biogram for the lover contains your affiliative capacities, your capacity to relate, your capacity to value, your capacity to have a healthy, robust, joyful sexuality, your capacity to be in your body fully without shame. So to the extent that we have shame issues, which are epidemic everywhere today, it is first and foremost a problem in this lover sector of the self. So anyway, the fourth and final biogram or power that we believe, Douglas Gillette and I and many others now believe to be the culmination of the development of the self actually is the King and Queen program. I started out with it, but actually it's the hardest thing to develop in a healthy way. It is the program for generativity and caring for the widest possible community without simple reference to one's own egoistic agendas. And so, as Doug Gillette and I say in this book on the King Within, which is coming out in March, it is really the fundamental psychological ground for servant leadership. And if you have noticed that a great number of leaders don't understand much about servant leadership, then again, it is a mark, we believe, of how difficult it is to form the male self in the fullness of its power, to complete its developmental agenda, get beyond the kind of self-involvement that narcissistic personality disorders manifest, and to put energies into building a viable human community. So these are the four powers in men and women, we believe. Different embodiment gives them different textures, different flavors, different expressions, and different embodiment, we believe, leads to an asymmetry in what is most difficult to develop at what time in life. Now let me go into that briefly now. Maybe I should stop for a moment before I get into that and just let you interact with me briefly about the four powers. Do you see the difference between the four powers? What we're saying are their functions. That is to say, these are four programs, if you will, which must be balanced if the self will be cohesive and fully functioning. Any comment or question about that before I go on? Yes. Let me run through the shadow forms, because I didn't really get into that. Might as well lay that out quickly. Let me start with the shadow form of the warrior, of course, is rage. Rage is always immature, ineffectual boy warrior energy. A lot of people don't like to hear that. I stand by that firmly. The high initiate black belt warrior doesn't waste time or energy on rage. He does what is necessary, uses necessary force, does not use unnecessary force. Rage is an impediment. Does that mean that that there's no place for rage? Rage is gold ore. Each one of these powers manifests first in undistilled, unrefined forms. You can't go from none of it to the refined form of it. You have to go through the refining process, which is messy and ugly and unpleasant. This is true on each one of these. So the shadow form is rage. It's one form of it. Another form is masochism. That is, there's sadism on one end. All these shadow forms are bipolar. The shadow we place here in this dialectic here. On what you can see these diagrams in the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover of the shadow forms in these various powers. Sadism at one end and masochism at the other. Normally, if somebody's very immature in the warrior, they will oscillate back and forth between those. They will be violent now and weepingly apologetic and masochistic 10 minutes from now. The shadow form of the magician, I've talked a little bit about. That's use of knowledge for antisocial purposes. Often denial of knowledge and understanding. Massive denial, which we see so much, is a pathology of the magician. Oversimplification is a pathology of the magician. In other words, we view all fundamentalisms of whatever sort as a pathology of this sector of the psyche. I just got back from Jerusalem, where fundamentalist Muslims confront fundamentalist Jews who confront fundamentalist Christians, all heavily armed, all sure that they have the truth. Is that the only possibility for the human species? I doubt it. I heard a story while I was there. It seems that the roof of the church in Bethlehem and the roof of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre were leaking. The Christians could not cooperate with each other enough to get the roofs fixed. So the Jews hired some Muslims to fix the roofs. There may be hope for the human race, you know? There may be hope. But fundamentalisms are not part of it. Okay, shadow lover, addiction and depression. If you're depressed, you have a lot of feeling. Congratulations. It's an achievement. If you tend toward addiction, congratulations. You're in touch with some passion. You want to eat it up, drink it up, etc., etc. I consider that an achievement in the lover sector. It's just that it's still in a kind of a gold ore form. It needs to be brought into some refinement, and it will bring you a lot less unnecessary pain, and just put you in touch with the necessary pain of life. And of course, the king and queen, shadow side, they do it to you for your own good. You know, tyranny, always the rationalization for tyranny is one side of it. That is the sort of inflated, narcissistic, megalomaniac rationalization of domination on the one hand, but there's another side, declaration of bankruptcy, abdication of the throne. So if you've got somebody that constantly, when they're given responsibility, pushes it away, that is a king or queen pathology. They cannot hold that program in an integrated way in their own personality. So they constantly give away their power. They refuse their power. They want to be in an idealizing relationship with someone else, who usually ends up loving it, that you give them the power, and then abusing you. Right? So those are the shadow forms, and they're elaborated, and we have 5 volumes on this coming out, and each one we take the particular program or power and elaborate its positive uses and its shadow forms. So any other comment or question before I go into this asymmetry that I think exists in the structure of the self? which gets us to the problem of forming a male self. Yes?
Significant that you drew, I mean, it appears from the diagrams that male and female are mirror images of one another.
Yeah.
And that in the two stages, adolescence and midlife, they're diametrically opposed.
If you notice, this is the structural form that I'll be talking about in just a minute. I'm going to talk about what I think the implications of this are. So anyway, you got the part. Let me go into that now. The thing I think about the asymmetry. It's still very politically incorrect to talk about gender difference very much. But there's mounting evidence. If you saw the cover articles in Time magazine recently about gender differences, research on gender differences, mounting amounts of research are being done. And it's going to rapidly become impossible to deny biologically grounded gender differences on a number of fronts. But one of the things I want you to notice here, these are in the same location. In other words, based on this model, we think it's equally difficult for males and females to gain adequate insight into the plumbing and the difficulties of living into the mistakes. So that process of really getting aware, fully aware, we believe that we're equal in that. Getting to full empowered generativity, we believe that's probably pretty equal too. Because it's just about as hard to find really public generative women as it is to find really public generative men. They're pretty rare creatures. The statistics of that are enormous. I mean, most folk don't get the generativity in our world. If they did, our world would be in a lot better shape than it is. There'd be somebody minding the store, so to speak. The asymmetry, we believe, comes. Let's take the male psyche here for a minute. What happens to the male body at adolescence, at puberty, that doesn't happen to the female at puberty? At puberty, males are flooded with 20 times the testosterone that females get at the same time. There has not been adequate attention to the way in which this enormous flood of testosterone in young males makes male development problematic. Problematic for males, problematic for the community, problematic for the world, unless there's some wisdom around and some integrated, loving, caring, generative elders who can help those young males figure out what all that stuff is for. There's a lot of evidence, for example, that adolescent males are designed for aggression in a way that makes them radically different from adolescent females. You can see this in the skeletal structure. You can see this in the way that the male body has evolved. A lot of people think that even the evolution of the male arm can be seen in the context of the hunting cultures and the use of weapons. The male arm evolved differently than the female arm with regard to holding weapons and in terms of what you might say throwing lances, throwing spears. There's enormous research now that's been done on that sort of thing. There's increasing evidence about what we've kind of intuited about males for a long time, and that is that there's something about male perception that's different from female perception. That is, there is a kind of tunnel vision. I mean, if you want to talk about it negatively, you can say tunnel vision. If you want to talk about it positively, you could say they draw a fine bead on a prey that they're hunting. They're able to focus in on the antelope out there. And that this difference in perceptual style is very likely, according to the sociobiological researchers and those that have studied this in terms of the human development and evolution, very likely resulting from the role as hunter of the male, and the kind of task that the male of the species was confronted with. And these things have been elaborated a lot. You can find a number of books now that treat some of these things. But in any case, the important thing is there is enormous evidence, historical, sociological, now increasingly biological, psychological, psychoanalytic, that young males are far more aggressive than females. And young females tend to be far more capable of awareness of the group, peripheral kinds of vision, certain kinds of senses. Smell is very different. Capacity to smell in certain settings is different. Capacity to be aware of emotional states is very different. One of the things that they're increasingly beginning to think is that actually in the brain structure, there may be differences. If you saw that article, there may be actual brain structural differences that explain why it seems to be that females can get from feelings to words a lot faster than males can. That is, in the hemisphere, in the lateralization of the brain, that there seem to be more connections between the hemispheres of the brain in the female than in the male. In other words, all this thing that Deborah Tannen has talked about differences in patterns of communication between males and females, may not just be cultural. Probably is not just cultural. Probably is a result of different embodiment that is caused by different evolutionary pressures on the genders in our evolution. This even extends so far as the fact that if you study male perception, nerve endings and blood supplies around the skin, you'll find that it seems to be that males of our species have been evolved in such a way as to sustain injury and still maintain blood supply longer than the female. And a lot of the researchers on this think this was because being able to sustain an injury and not lose all your blood was selective in terms of the evolutionary process. So in any case, there's enormous evidence, even in terms of the epidemiology of psychopathology, that males get into trouble far more through aggression and patterns of dominance than females do. Females tend to get into trouble? How do the patterns differ? Do you know about that? Females tend, what's the book? Women who love too much tend to be in more dependent patterns. Seem to be more depression in females. See? So, the asymmetry we think in the genders is on this axis and not this axis. In mythology, you see that, for example, in Greek mythology, it's said that Ares and Aphrodite were lovers, or that there is a tension, an attraction between the lover and the warrior in men and women. You see that a lot in sadomasochistic relationships. That's not, we think, an expression of maturity. We think that's an expression of unconscious coupling, where one leads with one strong point, the other leads with their strong point, and you get a hermaphroditic union, what Carl Jung called a hermaphroditic union that is not really whole. Now, forming the male self. I'm just throwing this out. If I'm right about this, then what would be the difference in the challenge between forming a male self and the challenge in forming a female self? Remember, the vision of wholeness is a balance of all four powers in both. So you can see that this sort of models Jung's idea that wholeness is the goal of individuation. I think that's true. But there's a difference here in the challenges. If the female of our species comes to the fullness of her warrior power in midlife, what advantage does she have in terms of using that in a positive way that a young male does not have? Somebody tell me. Look at that. What kind of life experience has she got at her disposal that a young male does not have? Look at this. Yeah.
Well, she has the experience of lover having gone through phases of lover magician.
What might that give her? Now, it gives her a lot of bad time. But what does she have? What does she have? She has got a leg up on empathy. In our view, because of the particular kinds of embodiment she has. She has got a better start at empathy anyway. Then she has got some time, years spent in fine-tuning that and finding out what's wrong with that, and how to be empathic, how not to be empathic, what happens when you're too empathic. See? She's had some time to then develop some wisdom about relationship. She's had some time to think about this thing. By the time she gets to really start feeling some aggression in a very full-blown way, she has a lot of life experience. It doesn't mean she always does it well, handles it well. I wouldn't say that. But I want you to compare this. Somebody see in their 20s and 30s here, working on insight. You don't really get into start studying insight into what's ticking, until you get into your 20s and 30s, if then. But the aggression comes online, and if this has not been abused, this has not been physically and sexually abused, and if this has been supported, if she's been supported in her development cognitively, you can't always depend on that. But if she's been supported, then she has the capacity to embody some really healthy aggression in a way that serves the community and the wider world. Doesn't necessarily mean she will, but she's got a lot of experience under her belt that the young male has not. Now, you're 14 years old, and you get flooded with this testosterone. What's that like? You males. Let's hear what it's like to be flooded with 20 times, a jump of testosterone. Wham! You're in testosterone city. What's that like? Come on. We'll say some other man told you this. We won't say you said it. What's that like? Want to drive 100 miles an hour. It's intense. You do anything you're big enough to do, right?
That's
Anything. You know, they write about Aries energy. Gene Boland has written about Aries energy, this passionate man, who can't make up his mind whether he wants to kill you or make love to you, or which order. There's a lot of that in testosterone. It's extremely aggressive, passionate, so aggressive and passionate that it requires, if it's going to be contained at all, incredibly powerful containing and channeling. And lacking those containers and channels, which are designed in some way to honor the force of this, it quickly can turn extremely ugly. And what has he not got? He does not have much development of empathy at that time at all. And in patriarchal cultures, he does not get any help in developing any empathy because, in my view, in patriarchal cultures, long ago, masculine initiation was lost. And so the males are afraid of their feelings of gentleness and tenderness because they have never been helped to understand the role of that in masculine maturation. So you get a lot of homophobic adult males who think the thing to do with their little boys is to punch them in the belly, make them tough. The exaggeration of this particular thing. But if the son starts to talk back to the father, starts to having his adversarial self-object needs met, we call it that in Freudian language today. They've discovered the warrior archetype, and now it's called adversarial self-object needs. Same thing. So the uninitiated father slaps his son down when the son starts pushing back. He ridicules him, he humiliates him, he gets him on the ball court. And he thinks that his manly job is to humiliate the boy, show him that the father is the one with the biggest sword. In other words, he has no grasp of the initiation, the task of initiating this energy. And so the boy very often will end up so wounded in his warrior sector by an abusive father that he tries to just bypass it. And he moves into being a trickster male. Jungians call those puers. That is the young male that's nice. He becomes the nice young male that mother likes and dad has lost interest in. because the fire is gone. Or, if the father doesn't abuse it out of him, he may model on the abusive father and become a sociopathic young male like the sociopathic father. But in those situations, that is, with a father who has not got this energy integrated into a mature self, it's very difficult for the son to get it integrated into a mature self. Now think about other problems that the young boy has here. Not only does he not have this lover energy and empathy and sense of the value of other people, he hadn't had time to get a perspective on things. I mean, he hadn't had time to research what happens when his automobile hits the bridge abutment at 140. It hadn't occurred to him. You know, he just knows that sharp boys, sharp guys go fast. You know, he hadn't done any research on what happens to bodies when they hit those things. See? He doesn't have a lot of perspective on that. It's very interesting today. There are a lot of fathers that are taking their teenage sons who are about to get their driver's license, and they're taking them to wrecking yards. And they're showing them these automobiles. Then they're taking them to quadriplegic wards and things like that. Is that right? You've done that? You had that done to you? By your father? Your mother's a nurse. Not by your father. Isn't that interesting? See? He thought it was a good idea. He thought it was a good idea. But there are increasing numbers of fathers that are getting together, not by themselves, they're getting together with their men friends, and they're taking their teenage sons and doing this informational thing with the boys before they get the driver's license and that sort of thing. So there's increasing awareness of this stuff, but we haven't really laid this out. We just don't talk about this fact of what? The dangerous young male. Forming a male self is more difficult in some ways for the community. People say, oh, that's not true. How do you say that? I suggest to them to do field research like I've done around the cities of the world. And I recommend that you do as I've done, and you go to the great cities of the world and walk the streets at night. And I want you to just do a scientific experiment for me. I want you to notice who you're afraid of in those streets at night. Is it the older women? No. Is it the younger women? Well, you know, I mean, they're a little more assertive in some ways, but you're not terribly afraid of being killed by them. Is it the older men? No. It is young males in every city of the world that you will notice when you're out walking the streets at night by yourself. The statistics of crime, mental illness, etc., support that internationally. This is amazing that this does not get talked about that much. That is, we do not raise the question about what happens when your system of education and human development does not help men get through this process. Now, I want you to look at this with me just a moment and think about the arms race in the world. The amount of the human GNP that goes into the production and sale of weaponry. And see how far you think we've gotten as a human species on male initiation now in our era. Worldwide, every 16-year-old wants his own M16 now. Or in Chicago, it's not an M16, it's a flat side. What do they call that? The 9mm automatic, or the Uzi. And I'm not just kidding you. You need to do some research into the way in which young males are pressed into service of every idiot and turned into soldiers at age 15, 14, 15, and 16 around the world. And so we haven't gotten to this place where we sense enough about the value of human life that this begins to get as much funding in terms of valuing life. The environment, ecology comes with this kind of sensibility, the sense for the environment. Trickster warriors create an arms race. So anyway, forming the male self is very difficult. It's always difficult to form a human self. But it's extremely difficult to form a male self in an empowered way because, let me tell you some more bad news. The difference in the threat level experienced by the person with regard to relationship. Females do not tend to become as fragmented when they become close to intimacy as males do. There's a lot of thought about that, a lot of theories about it. A lot of us believe that if a male does not get an adequate initiation in this warrior energy, he cannot form adequate boundaries interpersonally. Why does he need adequate boundaries interpersonally? Because in a way, he has to distinguish himself from his mother in order to form an engendered self in a way that the female does not. It's not that the female does not have to differentiate herself from her mother. She does. But there's also a sense in which, in order to become a fully initiated woman, she's got to be able to go back and sit on her mother's lap in some deep sense, some deep way. She's got to identify in some sense with that mother or with that grandmother or with that aunt or with that female mentor that carries the feminine. For a male to form an engendered identity that will not fragment in the context of intimacy, he has got to differentiate. He's got to form boundaries in a way that is different kind of experience for males and females. If he does not get this in place and he moves into his magician space, he will become a trickster that will appear to be in relationship when he is not. Now you see me, now you don't. You thought I was committed to this relationship. Ha! Or he will get deeply overcommitted in the relationship, discover that being in a relationship is enormously painful, be unable to protect himself from the aggression, legitimate and otherwise, of his partner. And therefore, he will continue to absorb pain and continue to absorb pain and continue to absorb pain, continue to absorb pain until the relationship is dead. There are millions of men who have not had an adequate warrior initiation, who do not know how to protect themselves in close, intimate contact in a relationship, that is, with an angry partner. They cannot protect themselves from the partner. The partner is angry. The partner needs to express the anger. The partner may be enraged. The partner knows everything about you, all of your weak points, brings them out, and if you have not had an adequate development in your capacity for boundaries, you will have all of that stuff coming directly in to the male self. And he will think he can take it. And then one day he will walk out of the relationship without a word. Gone. He didn't engage in any damage control, and the damage sank the ship of the relationship. It's a very widespread phenomenon. So in other words, it is essential that a male get this in place in order to maintain an intimate relationship. If this is not in place in adolescence, supported by initiating males, then he's going to have a stormy time in relationships. Probably not be able to have a successful intimate relationship. So the female has a great number of problems of her own that are related to this asymmetry. Been many books written about it. There are different kinds of issues. It's not the intimacy she fears. She does not fear the loss of her selfhood when she's intimate, in a way that a male fears his loss of selfhood when he's intimate. Now, there are enormous implications about this for relationships, and the need for empathy between the genders, empathy for what's different, what is more difficult for the different genders, and what each of us can help the other with, in statistically speaking. I mean, this is all probabilistic. Any individual you have to look at very carefully, see where they're developed. But forming a male self, each of these have to be supported in their development. If each is not supported by the community, by the elders, by the society, by the educational system, then there are going to be difficulties. And in my writing and in my lecturing, I have talked about the different kind of psychopathologies at issue when society does not support and bring these powers into an integrated form. So these are the asymmetrical challenges. Society, education, and spirituality have to, in my view, recognize these different trajectories, and instead of doing what they've done in the past, which is magnify these differences and stereotype them, we need, based on empathy, to see to it that we support those things which are flooding individuals at different times. We support them, we help them contain it, but we also help develop those areas which are not easy. For example, young women need a lot more help earlier in assertiveness training. They need a lot more support in terms of their development of patterns of cognition and relating that are more difficult for them. In the same token, males need a lot more support in the development of their capacities for empathy earlier, and all sorts of relational learning that we don't do well in our particular culture now. But in terms of our situation right now in the world, in the city of Chicago, there are very few things more dangerous than being born a male in the great cities of our land. A young male born in the great cities of our land has a much higher chance of being killed before he's 25 years old on the streets of our cities than he had in being killed on the battlefield in Desert Storm. We need to be clear about that. And so my sense is, what's going on here? We have had in our country and increasingly around the world, it's not just an American problem, we have had an abandonment of young males by their masculine elders. The people who should have been helping them understand the difficulty in forming and maturing a masculine self have been abandoning these young males wholesale. And if we don't address this problem directly in the world, we're going to see an increasing terrorism in the world by young males, and they're going to be end up putting a lot more money into prisons, and we're going to be killing a lot more young males on the streets, and we will not be dealing with the real culprit of this. It's not the fault of these young males. It's the fault of a cultures around the world which increasingly have forgotten the subtleties involved in helping young males contain their masculine energies in adolescence and early adulthood. So let me stop there. Let's take about a 5-minute stretch and a little short break, and then come back and let's engage this. Talk about it some more. If I had time, I'd spend a lot more time going into the possible masculine, thank you, because I have a very high view of the human possibility, the masculine gold as well as feminine gold. It's another thing about Jung's psychology. The archetypal self is full of potential, rich energy, incredible energy and vision for both male and female. And the way I see it is, if you can think about the richness inside you in terms of your encoded programming, is you men have got a full masculine with these 4 quarters with a code that understands the fullness of that integration that you might think of as the capstone of the masculine. And the women have the same thing in terms of the capstone of the feminine. There's a vision in there of wholeness. It's what the Buddhists call the 1 square inch of the 1 square foot, which is an image of Shambhala, or wholeness that is inside. They talk about the diamond body, and many other mystics have talked about the jewel within the self. And I think that that's not just mystic falderah. I think that's an intuition of an actual encoded structure that functions like a hologram in your psyche, that your psyche at deep level understands its potential. And sometime when you're into your grandiosity, what you're feeling is that potential self that is really in you. And so, and not only that, but you men have got this full encoding of the inner feminine in you that is equally as rich in its diversity and fullness in these 4 sectors as the masculine side of your personality, and that you have the code to understand and appreciate a woman who is full in those sectors too. Doesn't mean your ego has developed that yet, But in your encoding, you have the code to understand a really fully empowered, fully initiated woman who is shooting up with her feminine gold. And the same thing is true, I think, of the feminine. You've got this rich code for your full femininity in the four quarters, and you have within you your code for the fully empowered, fully filled out masculine. And that within you is the capacity to understand from the inside and appreciate some of that masculinity that you encounter. And so when we say we've got to deal with our shadow first, that's here. Jung said that. I think he was right about that. Then he said that the harder thing is to get in touch with your contrasexual. I think it's true. It's very deep in the psyche, harder to get at, harder to empathize with. But you are wired, I think, to be able to do that, to be empathic with the other gender, to recognize it is really different, but also to recognize that you have an evolutionary heritage which enables you to relate to it in a creative way. And so I think Jung was right that the deep bisexual self is an octahedron. And I think that is the shape of the code. And I think that if I had time, I would show you. I'll be teaching some more courses soon on the diamond body and psychopathology, showing you how you can show different forms of psychopathology related to lack of development in these different sectors. But let me open it up now and say this, that I don't consider myself a male basher at all. I think that male selves have enormous beauty and incredible potential as a positive, generative, healing force on the planet. And in fact, I don't think, if we don't see a large movement back toward helping males become fully empowered and responsible, I don't think we will be successful in meeting the planetary challenges that we have today. But tonight I wanted to say forming a male self is an enormously challenging task. It's bad enough when your tribe is awake about the difficulty of helping males get fully initiated. But if your tribe is ritually tone deaf and is operating under the assumption that there's nothing different about males and females, then the chances of forming a male self in a way that is pro-social, creative, and healthy for the planet and other living things is much less. And so I wanted to underline tonight and underscore that contrary to a lot of people today, I would argue that it is different, the task of forming a male self and a female self. At one level, at the highest level, is parallel. At the lower levels of trajectory, we don't start in the same places. The trajectory and the terrain is different at different times. And we have to acknowledge that. If we don't acknowledge it, we're betraying the young males of our time. And we're also betraying the young females of our time. Okay, so let me just open it up and let's discuss as long as we can. Yeah.
You talked about the trickster.
Yes.
As a negative sure archetype. What will allow us to commit to relationships? When, if ever, is the trickster positive? Or do we need to connect with?
The trickster, I think, is, see, I think you got to ask about these things, evolutionary biology. Why is it in there? Well, obviously it's useful at some level. And I think I like to say in polite company that it's your bullshit indicator. That is, that the trickster is that which can see oppression and tyranny for what it is and see that the emperor has no clothes. And if you'll notice, people that have this functioning in a good way are really quick to spot manipulation. And they're also quick to expose it. And they often can do it in a very humorous way. I mean, the trickster, a lot of the time, has a very good sense of humor. And, of course, it's at your expense if you are being pompous. So, in an ongoing sense, you would say that is one of the really positive contributions of the trickster. And if this magician self is not developed in either the female or the male, then the person will tend to be credulous and naive. An easy mark for anybody that wants to manipulate them and to seduce them into some ideology or fundamentalism or some scheme. So that would be one very positive thing. But you notice in creation myths, it's very interesting. Where does the trickster come? I gave a set of lectures on the trickster recently in which I talked about this a lot, but the trickster comes at the beginning of creation. And after the cosmos is formed and after the center in the world is developed, the trickster disappears from the story. So you have the trickster there to make room for humans. And you might say it this way, the trickster's there to make room for humanity. And if you're too grandiose, there's no room for human beings. Yeah, Charles.
One of the places where I think trickster might be positive is in the role of being a teacher, especially with adolescents. Because in a sense, a wise teacher, I always say, needs a gimmick.
Needs a
gimmick.
Yes.
And that's the trick. It's usually something that catches the attention of the adolescent, but it's usually to give them some depth and give them fire. But you need that flash. That
quickness. The other side of that, too, Charles, I don't know how many of you know Charles Payne, who is affiliated with the Institute, but he's also the head of Hales Franciscan High School in Hyde Park, which has been getting a lot of national publicity for working with youth. So he knows what he's talking about. But to really underline your point, it's like the trickster also can help the adult leader get out of the oppressive, tyrannical kind of a place into a kind of a dance with the young person. And if you study history of male initiation, this was done a lot. I mean, the older males got out there and dressed up, painted up, fixed up, got into as ridiculous a costumes as the young ones. And it's really a way, you're saying, to kind of help the young person get past the shame of not knowing so they can get into the learning. I want you all, when you get a chance, if you hadn't been recently, to go to Field Museum and go through the exhibits where they have a lot of exhibits about male initiation. And right before your eyes, you'll see it. I mean, all this energy of the males getting in there, fixing their costumes up, fixing their mask up, fixing their dances up, and it's got a lot of this trickster quality that you're talking about. Yes?
Touching on the concept of the jewel within the cell.
Yes.
It's sort of like a chicken and egg, it seems to me. The question is, here we have a potential of what we can be in the psyche that exists before the actuality.
Yes.
And yet you're saying this is genetically coded. And evolution is almost saying genetics is because of the environment.
Yes.
So are you really saying to us that this psyche and potential has been God-given? Because it almost seems to have to come before
you could ask that. I mean, if you want to put a theologian hat on, Of course, I like Whitehead, and Whitehead would say, well, of course. Whitehead, Alfred North Whitehead, talks about the divine initial aim that is behind every evolutionary movement, not just in this species, in every species. He talks about the divine lure that takes that species and lures it toward ever more intensity of feeling, ever more beauty, ever more aesthetic satisfaction. So a lot of theologians, not just Whitehead, talk about that. Teilhard de Chardin talks about the divine milieu in evolution. But you don't, from a biological point of view, you don't need that kind of thing. You just talk about what's adaptive, and what you can just cut the metaphysics off and say, well, biology is very simple. It balances forces. You study physics, you get balances of forces. So it's no accident that balances of forces would come up in biological structures. Why? Because unbalanced forces are not adaptable. Forces that, for example, if you had all this aggression not balanced with any empathy, you can't maintain structure. If I had time to talk about what happens in personalities that have too much aggression and not enough empathy, I'll show you they don't maintain structure. And by the same token, personalities that have too much empathy and not enough aggression, they don't maintain structure either. Personalities that have too much value on nurture and not enough criticism of power tend to become totalitarian and dysfunctional. It's like dysfunctional families. What are dysfunctional families? A lot of tyranny, not enough effective trickster function from within. A lot of denial about the tyranny in the family. So you don't need scientifically a concept of God, but increasingly scientists are not embarrassed at all about talking about the possibility of some divine initiative involved in all of it. So it's an interesting point. But I think it's really fascinating to look at history and think about all these mystics that intuited these crystalline diamond jewel structures in the human soul. And I think it's really fascinating to think, well, maybe they knew something. Maybe they were intuiting a structure of human possibility that's really in there. It's not just an idea. Yeah. Other questions or comments? Let's stick with the question of forming a male self. Yeah.
Are there obvious, overt characteristics of the undeveloped warrior?
Oh, yes. Undeveloped warrior. Well, as we say, these things are bipolar in their lack of development, and you'll see two forms of it. Somebody that has quick, hot rages chronically, that's always an uninitiated warrior, male or female. It's not gender specific there. Hot rages, uninitiated warrior, because rage is a raw material. You should never view your rage as a bad thing. You should see it as a very, very pure fuel. It is an enormously important fuel that you're simply not able to utilize yet. And it is wonderful gold ore for your capacity for effective assertiveness. But if you have a lot of rage, it is not integrated and needs to be worked on. Another thing, for example, if a person is having a lot of depression, we said that's a lover problem. Right, it's a lover problem. It's also a warrior problem, though, because if a person is flooded in feelings, they need to learn how to contain that and to cut it off when it's debilitating one, And so what I've discovered accidentally is that If I've got somebody that's got a lot of depressive problems, I can do dream interpretation with them for years and years and years and years, or I can send them to Aikido classes. And if they stay with their Aikido classes, within 6 months, their depression will be a great deal better. And I always take credit for their getting better. It's because you have this great therapist. But it's really the Aikido. Why? Because in a dojo, and it's not just Aikido, it's any well-done martial art, in a dojo, aggression is not cursed. Aggression is not blamed. Aggression is respected. It's honored. It is contained. And the person is enabled to relate to their aggression in respectful, mature ways. And they do not have to worry about their rage in a dojo. Because when an adequate black belt is their teacher, the black belt is not going to be harmed by their rage. And the person quickly learns, my rage is not dangerous here. And they quickly learn how to put it in a form that is effective, and soon they don't have a rage problem if they have an adequate teacher, sensei. So there are a lot of forms these things take, but there's passive. You always think about it. It's always an active and a passive form. If a person is addictive, has addictive problems, it is inadequate warrior stuff to balance the feeling. See, we should learn to find out where we're strongest. You ought to draw yourself a little diagram like this, and then take your pen and say, okay, which stage of initiation am I on this? Well, let's see now. Say I'm learning to get my assertiveness out. I am very nurturing to a fault, right? I am, and you do this on these, and then you look at that and you see where, say, I just don't understand what makes me tick, so I haven't gotten much of my magician developed in a healthy way. But you plot where you are, and you will, and then ask yourself, is my immaturity on this one coming out mostly passively or mostly actively? And you'll be surprised how much you can diagram yourself at your current stage of individuation. And I'll bet you, if you'll think about this a little bit, you would not be far wrong. I have had people do this around the country, talking to them about ways they can kind of plot their movement toward wholeness. The other thing I want to suggest is if you once notice which, say if you're a therapist, the tendency is to be better here and weaker here. If you're a clergy person, a therapist, helping profession of any kind, you tend to be weaker in your warrior lover, stronger in your magician, and to the extent that you're a really caring person, stronger in this or in this. Other professions are shaped very differently in terms of what they tend to be good at. Firemen, a really good fireman tends to be very good in this warrior stuff. Often pretty good here too. Because if they didn't value other people's lives a lot, they wouldn't be going into burning buildings. A lot of the time, firemen lack a lot of magician development in terms of insight in themselves, although they're very good technically. So they have some magician development on other fronts. So anyway, you can think about yourself like that and plot it, and you probably won't be far wrong. And here's the clue. Always put energy into the one that's least developed, because you'll get the most transformation for your time and energy that way. Yeah.
But how do you develop it? That's the challenge.
Well, that's actually the interesting thing is once you get some sense of what it is you're trying to do, it's much easier to do. It's not that difficult to work on these things, and you can once you determine where your self is least developed, it's pretty easy to come up with a set of things to do to strengthen yourself in that area. It is, for example, say you're not that good in the magician, and you know it, then you start keeping a journal. You start keeping a journal, within a short period of time, you're going to be a lot more reflective. You can't keep a journal for 6 months without becoming a lot more aware and reflective about your life. It's not possible. I mean, you can intend to keep a journal for 6 months and not do it and not get better. But if you actually keep a journal, you will get stronger in the magician sector. Other comments? Yes.
How, if at all, do you apply the concept that human development depends on movement from dependence to independence to interdependence to your model?
Yes. Well, I think that that it's quite clear that that would be a wonderful way to describe the maturation on this axis, particularly this axis. You know, we're all dependent when we start out, and both genders have to learn what interdependence is, and they have a little different problem. Their problems about that are not the same, but toward the mature end, they would look very, very similar. A mature man and a mature woman would be a lot more alike than immature men and immature women. See, because you can see them moving toward this. But now this capacity, you know, if you really elaborated that concept and talked about mature interdependence being an awareness that you have to be inclusive in your caring for the planetary context, then you could bring in the king and queen too. I don't know whether you mean to include that, but when you talk like that, but clearly, ecologically, we are interdependent. And so the capacity to care about the whole human context is the highest form of maturation in my mind.
Actually, what I was doing when I first started thinking about that
Yeah.
a minute or two ago was to think about it in each of the quadrants and to see if that fit in moving up through each of those individual quadrants, and then to think if it fit into the quadrahedron or the octahedron.
Yeah, yes.
In some pattern.
I'm sure, you know, in terms of relationship, that would be the case. There are many potentials in the human self that, you know, they're very rich, and I'm sure there might be some that might not fit that, but interdependence is clear in Jung, all of Jung's thought. Balancing opposites, acknowledging the sacred marriage, you know, of needing the other that can never be reduced to you. All that's built into Jung's thought. Other comments or questions? We still have some time. Yeah.
I heard thought about read the theory a lot, and it comes back to what I thought the point of this particular session was, and that is a certain practicality
Yes.
to initiation of the male.
Yes.
There was, when you talk about primitive times,
Yep.
but not only ritual, well, young males not only learn through the ritual process and grew that way, but a certain number of them were also lost to bears and tigers,
That's right.
to bows and arrows of other young males.
That's right.
When we're living in a day and age where basically that's taken away from the young male. There's no need to hunt. Foods have been domesticated in that sense.
And I also, a little bit of a sidetrack, really struck me your comment about the Civil War. Over the weekend I had the experience of visiting not only the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., but the battlefield at Antietam, which was the single bloodiest day in the Civil War.
Yeah.
And it has changed since then.
Yeah.
In a day and age when even in the war process, we just went through Desert Storm where we don't even need a few pilots or maybe not even pilots, smart bombs can destroy huge numbers of people.
Mm-hmm.
What does the young male do? What is his purpose when he's bombarded by 20 times of testosterone?
What should be his purpose?
What ritual processes do we practically take him through in order to get him through that period of time and into the other segments?
Well, I am quite serious about the necessity to contain and initiate that aggressive energy. I don't see us doing anything very adequate about it at all now in our educational system. Sports do not work for that. We get a lot of talk that they do, but they actually don't. They don't initiate the aggression into anything that remotely corresponds to what traditional cultures had. If I had my way, I would have martial arts taught in every school in the land, and I would have both sexes doing it at early ages. But I would really have the males doing it, and I would be having them led by senseis that had some sense of philosophy and ethics, so that they could have a perspective on what this is. Why is that? Why is that needed? Look at the epidemic of domestic violence in this country. It is terrible. The recent research shows it's much worse than we ever thought. Recent Harvard studies. Every social class, it's not just the lowest social classes. And rape is an increasingly dangerous phenomenon. Every campus in the United States, including this one, has problems with rape, and the campus security do not talk honestly about this in most campuses. Now, this is a problem, and you don't fix this by having the sports programs be the sports dormitories in places where the athletes live being the most dangerous places for young women. And you don't fix it when the frat houses are equally dangerous for young women. That is, the very places that claim to be initiating young males into manhood are the most dangerous places for young women. Now, how do you deal with that? You deal with it directly. You deal with male aggression. You stop pretending it doesn't exist, because the statistics on domestic violence and rape in this country ought to be enough to batter down the most massive walls of denial. Now, how do you do that? Well, you don't do it by teaching young men that they are nice. You teach them that they are dangerous and that they need to learn what that stuff is for. It is to serve and protect the human community. It always has been. It always will be. So what do? You have martial arts instruction, particularly in the forms like Aikido, which are based on harmony and love and nonviolence. I mean, there are people. Now, I'd have a lot harder time selling Taekwondo to a lot of schools than I would Aikido, probably for bad reasons. But Taekwondo is far more aggressive on the offensive than Aikido. But if we put some energy and money into developing a network of responsible martial arts instructors and involved them in our schools with young males, our violence problems would go down rapidly. be a lot safer on the streets of the cities. And anything less than taking a direct, honest approach to male violence is not going to deal with this thing. And you get these boys through their teen years pretending to be nice, and then when they're married, they'll be beating their wives and their kids. That's what's happening now. Yeah.
Are you talking about a method of instruction or a method of initiation? It seems to me that in referring to Aikido, you're talking more about a method of education than you are initiation.
Initiation that's effective is education. It's education in values. It's education on a kind of embodiment. And it's education about the uses of one's potential. So education always was that prior to our particular time. Value-free education is a recent anomaly, about these things. Yes?
Doesn't initiation also encompass the separation or killing off of ideas and the separation of stage from youth to the...
Yeah, it is a separation. There's no question about it. It's a separation from immature abuse of power. It's basically what initiation is. From immature abuse of power. And it's very simple for us to understand what immature abuse of power looks like. It doesn't require a brain surgeon to figure out what it looks like. We got clear examples of it on all these fronts. And so I'm not hopeless about our situation. However, unless we get serious about the fact that adults don't just happen by watching MTV. Adult girls, turning girls into women, is a big challenge. There are those people who don't understand anything about initiation and all this whole process that say having a child initiates a female. That is totally ridiculous. Initiation is a spiritual, emotional, and psychological reality, not simply a biological happening. The biological happenings are challenges for culture and spirituality to come in and help that representative of the species become fully what it can become. And that's the challenge of our time. Yeah.
The idea of putting martial arts in schools for both sexes sounds nice, but I'm wondering if indeed it would have much effect between school politics, between parents' attitudes, between young men who live in ghettos whose money is more important, so they'd be more interested in selling drugs and keeping people on drugs, as a way of making money. How would that...
Well, you don't see, if you think about, well, if your practical purpose, you have to say this. It's very simple. Adults have to be involved in this. Concerned, responsible, powerful adults have to be deeply involved in this at all levels. They have abdicated. That's the point. I say I'm hopeful. I'm not an optimist. It requires enormous sacrifice to provide the kind of care that younger generations need. Sacrifice, where is that located? It's here. Generativity. You don't have that kind of capacity, not for masochism, for self-conscious, clear-willed sacrifice on behalf of the community and the human society. That requires a lot of development. Is that possible? Absolutely. Do we see people like this? Absolutely. Do you know any? Look around. You probably know some people with that kind of generative energy. Have we challenged people enough on this? No. We've got to get very clear that there's not any such thing as a mature man or a mature woman who is not deeply invested in the youth and in the society and willing to give over and above their comfort level to the society and to the younger generations, not just my family. Now see, other cultures, study them. Other cultures did this. In those tribal cultures, and many of them that still exist today, the responsibility for the emotional, spiritual health of these youth was assumed by other adults that were not the parents and were not hired hands. This was a volunteer thing on the part of all the people of the group. Now, so when you say, that's not feasible, well, it's not feasible in a society that doesn't understand generativity, but it has been done by the vast majority of human beings in all history. Yeah, Charlie.
Real short, one thing I think is important is adults have to ask themselves if they're an initiative person.
Absolutely.
It's very important for adults to begin to work on themselves.
That's right.
Because you need initiative people to initiate
Absolutely.
other people. That's one thing. The other thing is, my impression is, the money you talk about with young males or adolescents. I think that there's something more important that young males will respond to, and that's a caring adult, particularly another male. It's more important than money. That's my experience.
What is important to young people, period? Significance. Significance. If money is the way they get a sense of significance, then that'll be a big thing. But Adler understood it, Jung understood it, Freud understood it. We're all significance junkies. How do you get your sense of significance? When somebody looks at you and sees you. Yeah, go ahead.
I think touching into that and touching into the containment of the martial training for the warrior energy would be then taking that and directing it into mission.
Absolutely.
Developing the concept in young women of now where does this energy go now that I've learned to control?
Absolutely.
And
what's it for?
It creates empowerment and it creates individuation because each person will have a different mission. And if they can direct it into purpose, they're going to have a feeling of significance. Say, I am significant to this community. And they get right back to it.
Now, that's a wonderful, we've got to stop now, but let me say that's a beautiful place to stop, and let me just piggyback on what you're saying, because, see, if you take Jung's point of view seriously, there is really a great self in there in you. It's not just pathology. Your sense of greatness is not just some sort of narcissistic pathology. In fact, I like to say it this way. If you really take Jung's point of view seriously, until you develop a feeling about yourself that could legitimately be called mythic, if you don't achieve a sense that you are significant in a way that's like those figures in myth, that's what you're talking about mission and purpose in life. I've come to believe that you haven't healed your narcissistic pathology until you have that sense of purpose, that sense of mission in the world. That in fact we don't get healthier when we get away from myth. We get healthiest when we get to be able to live in a sense of how significant we are. That really you do make a big difference, and you can make a big difference to the world. And so, I've talked about that a lot on a tape I made with Michael Meade called "The Great Self Within." But it's really your point there. It's that is to say, we have got to get to the point where our kids don't come out of high school and college taught that they really have no wider significance. Their lives have no wider significance. That the largest significance of their lives is simply getting a job, making money, and having a BMW or the latest kind of VCR. Other peoples knew better than that. That's a recipe for disaster. Depression, nihilism, cynicism, and disaster as a culture. So your comment's a good place for us to start. That is to say, when you get that connection with the king or queen within, you will have a sense of what your warrior energy and magician energy and lover energy is for. And so that's why it's the hardest thing to achieve, but why it's the crowning, we call it the crown of our development. I thank you for being here tonight and working on this stuff. The other people that will be talking to you will see it completely differently. So everything I've said they will disagree with, and that's fine. But it's a fascinating and important topic, and I thank you for coming to engage it. Thanks a lot. Thank you.